I grew up in Long Island, outside of New York, and it's a landscape that is very suburban, very, in a way, dead. And so I rejected the culture that I grew up in and chose to live in my imagination. And so the driving force behind my writing is mostly imagination and the idea that others also can live in their imaginations. Well, it's just in American literature, often the content is cultural content where a speaker is speaking about a particular situation that a subgroup of people are experiencing, rather than the total human predicament. But I feel like Latin American literature, for instance, is very focused on the existential predicament, the bizarreness of being alive itself and feeling and thinking and how strange that is to begin with. And so my work is much more like that, or like Kafka, Franz Kafka, where it's just really, you wake up one day, today I woke up in a hotel in Shanghai. How strange is that, And then next week I'll be someplace else. And somehow I'm the same person as a child that was playing in sand by an ocean decades ago. How could I be the same person, really? What is that, the meaning of that? It doesn't make any sense. So to write in conventional terms, like a lot of American literature, seems useless to me. I want to write about how strange it is to be alive. I think that I think of it as being a performance, like playing a piece on the piano. A pianist goes before the audience and plays the piece through from the beginning to the end. So when I sit down to write a novel, I feel like I have to do the whole thing from the beginning to the end. Well, during the week as I'm writing it, I will reread what I wrote the day before, and then at that time I might alter something, but at the end of the week I try to leave it as it is. Sometimes there are constraints in publishing, like American publishing likes to have a novel be 300 pages. So if the book is shorter than that, they might say, can you please add one more chapter or something, But and then I might do that, but usually it's just the same as it was when I wrote it. Well, life, as I was saying before, life is so strange, and I think that the cast of human characters and human situations is always repeating throughout history. And so when you read ancient poems, the same things were happening to people then as are happening now. So I think the task when I sit down to write a novel is just to be as clear and as plain as possible in saying something that is about the struggle that people are engaged in today. Usually it's some kind of a social struggle. Well, because that's the job of the reader. I mean, what is a book? What should a book do? I think a book should change a person. You should read a book and at the end you should be a different person than you were at the beginning. That's the best possible experience of a book. And so in order to change, a person has to do the work themselves. That's not work anyone else can do for you. Well, I think that first of all it's fine for people to misunderstand, because everyone's experience of life is different. But I think things should be difficult. You might have to read a book twice in order to understand it. Certainly there are some books that I've read 20 times, and each time it gets better. So I think maybe that modern view that a book, you just flow through it and then it's gone and it's as if you ate an ice cream cone or something. That's not a real book. Yeah. It's fine, I like ice cream cones also. Well, I think the world is a great confusion, and there is certainly the gap between people is so much that it's hard to ever really be understood by someone else. So in that sense, it's hard to empathize with someone because you can't really know what they're thinking. But I still think that it's very important to try, even though it's not possible. Well, it's not possible just because the world is so different for each person. What you believe all these objects to be like for this table that is over there on the side of the room, for you, what a table means is so different from what a table means to me, that even if we both are thinking of the same thing, table, we're not really thinking of the same thing at all. You know, do I find it sad? I think life is still good. I think I feel ultimately very optimistic about being alive. I think there are always tyrants, there are always political tyrants, you know, who are in charge, and people are always doing harmful things to one another and hurting them, but within the space of your life you can reach out to other people and try to be generous and be joyful, and there is enough space to be satisfied, I think, and content. There are always many selves anyway, so when you have a bunch of different friends, it can be difficult to have a party where all the friends come together in the same room at the party, because when you meet them individually, you're a different person with each one. And so it's almost embarrassing for them all to see you together, you know, because you don't know who to be suddenly. And so I think we always have been having these different selves, and I think it's very natural to try on these different masks of identity. So I would say that's a positive aspect of the internet, that you get to be many different people for many different people, and you get to escape being stuck as one particular person. Because maybe the worst thing that can happen in life is to be stuck in a situation that you can't escape, where everyone knows that you're something small and horrible, you know. But if you can escape that, suddenly the world opens up, you know. Sometimes for children, they're at one school maybe, and they're having a very hard time socially, and then their parents move to another town, and all of a sudden in the new town, everything is fine for them at school, you know, and they can make many friends and have a good, and it's just that at the old school, everyone knew who they were, you know, and that's oppressive. But you go to someplace else, all of a sudden, all the possibilities of life are before you. Yes, I think it's great, yeah. And because ultimately, I don't believe that there really is a self at the heart of it, you know, at the heart of a person. I think there's an illusion of self that is a part of thought, you know. As I was saying before, for instance, I was a child. My mother had me at the beach maybe when I was 3, and I was walking, like crawling in the sand, you know. So there's this little human creature who's 3 years old crawling by the sand, and in the mind of that little creature with the salt water going over its hands, there are images and things appearing and some self. And now somehow I'm the same person with the same self as that creature. I don't believe it. I think that we're constantly, like, it's like the frames of a film, like chick, 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 chick. You know, the self is an illusion that is always appearing, and it helps us to exist as people, but we don't have to believe that it's true. The class on the walking class, or yeah, well, that class was an attempt to solve a problem, which is just that I found, one day I asked the students in my class to draw a map of where they go over the course of 2 weeks. And essentially it's like they're at school or they're at home, and then they have some third place, like a restaurant or a bar, and it's basically just back and forth between these places. And so I thought, this is kind of sad. They live in Chicago, which is a beautiful city. Maybe their lives would be enlarged if they were forced to just walk all around the city, meet people that they have never met before, talk to them, especially to have to ask people for things. So I would do an exercise where you have to leave your phone, you have to leave your identification, your money, your house key, and you just have to go out and walk with nothing for 5 hours around the city. And while you're out there, if you get thirsty, you just have to ask someone for water, which is amazing. In our lives now, we never have to just ask someone for something, you know. So I think it can change a person. It's usually exciting for them because I think there's a vision, a consensus vision of life, of like what life has to be. And if you take a little hammer like this and crack at it, all of a sudden you realize that it doesn't have to be that way at all. You know, it shatters, and the world is much larger and much more beautiful than the like supposed world of each book I'll write in a different place. And the reason is that if I can't write at home because I know who I am when I'm in my house. If I sit in a chair in my house, I've sat there so many times before that I know what I would be like if I sat in that chair, you know? But if I go out into the town to some coffee shop that I've never been in before, I don't know what thoughts I would have sitting in that chair there. So it's really like using a blank piece of paper to do a drawing, whereas in my house it would be like drawing on top of something I had done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drawings before, you know. Well, I don't think that it has to be specifically literature. I think that there's a kind of examination of the world, a philosophical examination of the world that traditionally takes place in poetry, especially in poetry, but also in the last hundreds of years in novels, in film, and in art. And I think that most people will choose to live their lives with their eyes closed. They'll go around and you see them walking up and down the street doing the things that they're going to do with their eyes closed, and they don't feel it that much. But it's certainly possible for them to feel. And there are other people who want to feel as much as they can. And so I think for those people, something like a novel allows them to try to feel what someone else has felt. So if I read a book, like I was talking about Kafka, if I read a book of Kafka's, all of a sudden I'm feeling what someone felt in Prague in 1915, you know? Or if I read a book, maybe a book of ancient Rome, then it's thousands of years ago, what someone was feeling thousands of years ago. And that's really magnificent, you know? And so, I don't know, I don't think the world needs anything, because I already told you that I feel like it's a car crash, you know, like everything is going to go badly, and that's fine, that's just how it is. That's the nature. Humans are causing an extinction, and that's the world. However, on a day-to-day basis, for a person, like for you or for me, we get to make choices about how much we want to feel and what we can know. And I think for a person like that, then literature is wonderful. Living people, I really like a British poet. Her name is Alice Oswald. She's very wonderful. I don't know if she is translated into Chinese, but she's terrific. Yeah, Alice Oswald. She has a book that is a retelling of the Iliad, you know, the Homer's the Iliad, and it's just all the unimportant deaths. It's not like the death of Achilles or of Hector or of the great ones. It's all of the unimportant people, like how they die in the war. And in poetry, it's very beautiful. But she's extremely, extremely good. So she would be probably my favorite alive right now. But of recently dead, I love, there's a French writer called Edouard Levé, and he's magnificent. He passed away maybe 2005. Around that time also Sebald, W.G. Sebald, I really love him. Before that, this woman Agatha Christoph, who I love very much, a Swiss writer. Most of them are not American. Oh, ancient Greek literature. Yeah, I do like ancient Greek literature. Yeah. Well, it's so interesting to realize that somebody could have been living 2,500 years ago and had similar feelings to what I feel today. So it's the perspective that you get from it. Well, I think that China is a place of many contradictions. It's too big to say any specific thing about it. Just as to say something about all of America or all of Europe or all of Africa, it's so general, it's almost meaningless. But I think within the culture of China, which is so ancient and has so many facets, there is a very, very deep subtlety, of a sophistication that's not to say that everyone on the street, you meet somebody on the street and they're going to be very like gentle and like have a perfection of their, you know, their manners or something like that, you know. However, I think that in some places such sophistication doesn't exist at all. but I think that in the culture of China, the sophistication does exist. And I think that kindness, how kind someone can be, is based on the amount of delicacy, how delicate people can be with one another, because only in guessing about someone else how they might be feeling can we be as kind as possible, since we have to take them into account. And so I think in some of these cultures where being courteous it matters a lot, the courtesy, the behavior, sophistication, there can be the most kindness. And so I would hope that since this is one of the subject of my books, how to be gentle, how to be kind, that it could find readers here. Well, I think that for young people, it seems like there are all these forces that are against them. You know, the forces of culture, of the state, the government, even just older people having done disastrous things that have consequences for their lives. But I think it's also very exciting to be young and to try to change the world. So I think it's always worthwhile to try to destroy everything and start again.